European Union Election Observation Mission to Nigeria as their report on the 2023 general election, which says that they've identified 6 areas of improvement in Nigeria's electoral process moving forward. The chief observer of the mission, Mr. Barry Andrews, gave a press conference today alongside some of his colleagues, and that in that presentation, they've prioritized or released a priority recommendation based on the observation of the general elections held on February 25th, March 18, and April 15. Some of the key areas listed by the mission are ambiguities in the law, the establishment of a publicly accountable process for the selection of INEC members, and ensuring real-time publication of and access to election results. Let me allow you to listen to the head of the EU Election Observer Mission to Nigeria.
In the lead-up to the 2023 general elections, Nigerian citizens demonstrated a clear commitment to the democratic process. That said, the election exposed enduring systemic weaknesses and therefore signal a need for further legal and operational reforms to enhance transparency, inclusiveness, and accountability. Positively, Nigeria has signed up to key regional and international commitments for democratic elections. While we consider the electoral legal framework provides an adequate foundation for the conduct of democratic elections, there are ambiguities in the law. For example, the Electoral Act 2022, which had its first test in a general election in 2023, and other legal instruments evidenced gaps in terms of transparency, accountability, and inclusivity, and left room for uncertain implementation. For that reason, we recommend, and this is our first priority recommendation, to protect the interests of voters through certainty of law for all stages and aspects of electoral processes by eliminating from electoral law and regulations errors and ambiguities to avoid potential for confusing interpretations and ensuring the revision processes are inclusive.
That's Barry Andrews, the head of the EU Election Observer Mission to Nigeria, their observation of the 2023 election. But INEC was present there. The National Commissioner of INEC on Voter Education and Publicity, Festus Okoye, spoke to journalists after the event. This is the reaction of INEC to EU's observation. Take a listen to Mr. Okoye.
Nigerians have commended the Commission for the introduction of the BVAS for purposes of voter accreditation. In terms of voter accreditation, nobody has faulted the functionality of the BVAS in all the elections we conducted. The only challenge this Commission has had is the issue of result upload for presidential election only. And I believe that it is not fair to judge the entire performance of the Commission on the basis of glitch in result upload for the presidential election. But we must also recognize the fact that the law itself has also given the political parties the opportunity to know what goes on at each polling unit. Almost all the political parties, or at least 5 of the political parties, nominated and got accredited over 170,000 polling agents. So what that means is that they had primary evidence of the results from the polling units. And it is those results from the polling units, together with the BVAS as a machine itself, that goes to the collation center. So it is not true, and it cannot be correct for a political party to rely only on result upload in order to get the evidence with which he wants to prosecute his case in court.
Festus Okoye, INEC National Commissioner for Voter Education and Publicity. Let's get some insight into this. What the EU has submitted, its propriety, the validity and veracity of it, and what lessons for Nigeria. I mean, INEC has a standalone. They've done their best. The tribunal is looking into it. There are those who are not happy with it, and across the country, there are those who have gone to the tribunal. Samson Itodo, Executive Director of Yega Africa, he joins us from Sierra Leone, where himself and some of his colleagues have gone to monitor and observe the election there. Thank you so much, Samson, for joining us tonight. But before I get into Nigeria's election, I know severally over the last election cycle, Sierra Leone has had their own election. We've had our election cycle just before theirs, and they've always had their elections after our own. But from what Sierra Leone did, I mean, Sierra Leone, a smaller country in terms of population and in fact of size, and their experience of democracy, maybe not as sophisticated as our own, and in terms of independence, so we might have some edge over them. But from their election, what lesson do you think it holds for Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. I think that the Sierra Leonean elections, has actually underscored the importance of public participation. About 83% turnout was recorded for this election. So if you compare that to Nigeria's less than 30% turnout, there's something we ought to learn from Sierra Leone, because citizens came out in their large numbers to cast their vote, because elections is a festival of democracy. So turnout is actually one thing. The fact that citizens believe in the process and they are able to show up to cast their vote, I think it's something that we need to learn, because the level of turnout for Nigeria's elections, it's not abysmally low, but very disappointing. And I think that that's one thing we can learn. The second critical thing, we can also learn from the Sierra Leonean election is the fact that on the day of election, there's no restriction of movement. And so people are able to move around, go about their daily affair, despite the context for which this election was conducted. It was conducted under intense political environment, but also an environment of polarization, deep polarization and mistrust. But just an hour ago, or less than an hour ago, the Electoral Commission has announced, the incumbent president, Madabio, as having secured 56%, of the vote. The major civil society organization, which conducted the PVT, has questioned the integrity of the elections, and that the official results are not a reflection of the ballot cast, because they fall out of the margin. Because based on the PVT data, no candidate will secure, the 55% required for returning a winner, and they had projected a runner. But it's shocking to everyone that the Electoral Commission has gone ahead to declare a winner. And I don't think it's a lesson that Nigeria should learn. And it just clearly tells you that politicians are determined on a consistent basis to continue to undermine, the electoral process just to secure votes at all costs.
Interesting. We're concerned. We're also looking at what is happening in Sierra Leone. But let's remove the log in our own eyes, and let's look at what is happening in our own country, Nigeria. The EU, I'm very certain that you are privy to the outcome of the EU's press briefing today. 6 areas they have identified. Give us your own view of what the EU has said today. INEC, as Mr. Okoye immediately rebuffed what EU has said about the elections. What's your own view?
Well, I think it's important to note that the EU Observer Mission came on the invitation of the Nigerian government. And the Nigerian government invited the EU, and it's consistent with practice to come observe our elections. And they have published a report. And I say this, that the report published by the EU are consistent with the observation of local civil society organizations, including other international organizations. It reflects our position, and they're quite consistent because they raised issues that citizens and civil society highlighted in the build-up, during and in the post-election period. The operational challenges and shortcomings that were identified are consistent with what YAGA Africa and other civil society organizations have also highlighted in several statements that we have issued on the 2023 general elections. The report also highlighted the positives, because often when we audit, when we review elections, we always focus on the negative. But this report also underscores the fact that the new innovations introduced by INEC and reforms introduced by the 2022 Electoral Act did improve the process. However, there were several variables that impugn or cast a shadow of doubt on the credibility of the 2023 elections. And one of them is the independence of INEC. And the second priority recommendation was to the effect that the country needs to review the appointment procedure for national commissioners as well as resident electoral commissioners, because we're all witnesses to the electoral coup that occurred in Adamawa State during the last election. You could clearly see that there were individuals with partisan backgrounds who were appointed into INEC, and part of the recommendation is the appointment needs to be based on merit, it needs to be based on verified non-partisanship, and also based on competencies. Because INEC in a statement was clear that the resident electoral commissioner for Sokoto State was, incompetent in the way they managed the election. So that's one of the recommendations. So everything that is contained in that report, both the positives and the negatives, are a reflection and they are consistent with the views of civil society and citizens. And they've gone ahead to make some recommendations. And this is not the first time that the EU, is releasing a report. And I say that the verdict of the EU on these elections is a welcome development.
So something, so one will have to look at a few issues here. There are those who are pro or anti-colonialism tendencies and who think that foreign influences on our democratic practices, and those who are of that school of thought who think that the West need to allow growing democracies to breathe and allow them to also grow their own democracies in such a way that they're not breathing down on their necks. One of the concern here is the timing of the EU's report coinciding with what is happening in the courtroom. Is that sensitivity observed from what you think as a lawyer?
Well, Seun, this is not the first time. It's consistent with practice. In 2007 till date, the EU have consistently been invited by the Nigerian government to come observe the elections. And why are we inviting, the international community? Because we are not a country that exists in isolation. These are our friends and our partners, and we engage, at different levels. So there's an existing bilateral relationship. And Nigeria, has done what? Has not only domesticated, but ratified certain global as well as regional instruments like the Africa Charter on Democracy, Democracy, Elections and Governance, the ECOWAS Protocol. We are all signatories to this. And what this really portends.
I'm asking my question based on the fact that there is a process. Just for a moment, something. I'm asking the question based on the fact that there is a process. The election held, and there is a judicial process to review the election. And I thought that could have been allowed to rest, or before the judicial process began, maybe EU would have come out with his own position. Not in the middle. If you hear some of the reactions that have trailed it, someone with are for and against, should the EU have come out in the middle of a judicial process? Isn't it sub judice?
Well, I don't think it's sub judice. It's just a report, on the conduct of the election with its recommendations. And it's just the same way we issue preliminary reports as well as final reports. Several civil society organizations have released their report on the election. I don't think, quite frankly, that the intention is to influence, the current cases being handled by the court. It's not in any way an attempt to interfere with that process. It's just part of the practice in the election observation ecosystem, that right after elections, a few weeks or months, you submit a report, and that's why the report contains recommendations that critical stakeholders like the legislature, like INEC, like civil society, can adopt to improve the credibility of our process. So in my view, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the timing. I think that it will not influence anyway. In any case, all the parties, especially at the presidential level, are about closing their cases. And so I don't think this, sort of impact on that.
So it takes me to yet another point in this conversation.
Actions that INEC and National Assembly will take.
Yeah, it takes me to yet another part of this conversation, which is the aspect of what the EU has identified and the pitfalls in the election. Two issues. From the EU stance, does it discredit the election and the outcome? Does it also show some kind of inconsistency in the manner and approach of the conduct of INEC for this exercise?
I'm not holding briefs for the EU, but having engaged with the EU and also engaged in elections at a global level, I don't think the intent of this report, is to assess and make a judgment as to the credibility, of our elections. The EU has a comprehensive framework for measuring and assessing election based on certain values and principles that a country, in our electoral law and our constitution, have set for ourselves. So I don't think the EU is making a judgment as to the credibility of the process. And Nigerians and INEC and the courts have a duty, to make that determination. And
yeah,
the matter is important.
But these are also, you can make influential, you can make an inference on what the EU has said. So, but I would like you to touch on.
Yeah. You made the second point, not just about the credibility, but about, loopholes identified. There's nothing new in this report that the EU has published. It is the same issues that we have highlighted, including you, Sharon, in the course of your coverage of elections that you've identified as gaps within our electoral process. And for the purposes of deepening the integrity of our elections, we've got to undertake further reforms, that would help strengthen the credibility of our process. But the matter is already in court. We leave it to their lordships to make a determination. And if petitioners are dissatisfied, there are appeals procedure that have been established by our laws. And we wait for the Supreme Court and the other courts that have jurisdiction as a final arbiter to make a determination.
Yeah. Before I allow you to get some free dinner in Freetown where you are, if there's anything like that, because I understand that even in Freetown, there's no such thing as free in the market there. But finally, there are recommendations as to review of relevant electoral laws in Nigeria. We have a brand new electoral law, 22. They've raised some question mark on the use of technology, appointment of key stakeholders and officials that are manning the process of our election. And you look at what INEC says it will also do, like INEC says it will begin a process of internal review and engaging stakeholders to look at that process. So if there is something that is critical for INEC to look into, and perhaps a legal framework review that we need to do, which aspect would you suggest that we should look into critically?
I think first you need to look at the Constitution. The process of appointing commissioners into INEC needs to be revisited. That's one. Two, this ambiguity as to the transmission of results needs to be addressed. because there are certain clauses in the law that are quite unclear, they are quite ambiguous, and they are inadequate. So things like results management, there's need for clarity in that regard. And then the third critical thing, that also needs to be addressed with respect to our electoral legal framework, deals with, this point about electoral offenses prosecution. We have seen a high level of electoral impunity in the last election, either instrumentalization of voter suppression, fake news and hate messages. These are fundamental issues that we need to use our laws to fix. But we know this. You can have the best of the laws, but if our political class do not change their attitude towards politics and elections, it's not going to fix or regulate political behavior. And that's the biggest thing, that biggest challenge before us, because this new electoral act, to a large extent, is a good act. It's the best legal framework that we've had in recent past. But you still see how politicians went rogue in the 2023 elections, compromising INEC officials, intimidating voters, suppressing votes, and making it difficult, for people to exercise their franchise.
Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yiaga Africa, a lawyer, and is currently in Freetown. I might be able to get a free dinner, but I'm not sure if you will be able to get one in Freetown, monitoring, observing election in Sierra Leone. Thank you so much, Samson.
Nothing is free in this world.
Absolutely. Well, in some part of, because Salah is tomorrow, and some of my friends are already calling me for free Salah meat. So I'm going to get some free Salah meat. You may not be able to get that. So thank you so much, Samson.
I hope you keep mine.
You might not be able to meet some when you come back. Thank you so much, Samson. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.